super happy that you brought both a demo and a final version, which gives us a sense of how a track can evolve. I've seen photos of the really cool studio you have over on your place at Bowen.
Yeah, so the quote for me, I like to make albums not in the city. And so I don't live in the city. I live on this little island, like a 20-minute boat ride away. But I really like getting out of. I don't like people having to run to the store all the time or go to Starbucks or I'm going to get lunch from Subway or something. I just like people to bring their little lunch bags and work on music all day and nobody's distracted. So I try my best to get people to come to my little studio as much as possible, or if there's a budget, then we'll go to a studio in the woods somewhere. And so the song I'm going to play was, we did it at a studio in Alberta called OCL Studios, where Elise has been working a lot at. And it's not in the woods, because Alberta doesn't really have the woods, but it's in the prairies. But you drive for a while outside of Calgary, and then you're just on these like little side roads, and then there's this mansion with this studio in this mansion, and it's a really cool place to make a record, and you can sleep there and everything. So
residential style, yeah.
Yeah. It's
Andrew Sheps is doing that a lot. He's got that studio, and and you've had stuff mixed by Andrew Sheps.
He's mixed one album for me. Yeah.
Great, and the song is called.
So okay. I'll talk about this song a bit. So I'm making this record with this guy named Ken Stead, and so he's written the record, and we've back and forth on all the demos, and I actually flew to Edmonton and we did pre-production, and we had 9 songs or 10 songs, and then it became to tracking time, and I arrive at OCL Studios in the country, and Ken arrives, and he drove down from Edmonton to come down, and if anyone's driven that halfway down or somewhere, there's this town called Drumheller, and Drumheller is where, like, there's tourist attractions for all the dinosaur bones and this kind of stuff. So Ken drove down with his drummer, and I don't know how much I should reveal, and I don't think he'll mind, but I think they stopped in Drumheller. And anyways, they arrived at the studio. We were working through the songs, and we've got this one other song. I said, what's it called? And he said, it's called Jeff and Ken in Drumheller. And I was like, okay. And so and he's sort of like a rootsy country sort of artist, and he had this song, and it's basically about them getting high and looking at dinosaur bones, and then the chorus was Jeff and Ken in Drumheller, and they thought it was great, and so what I thought would be fun and to pick this song is, so a lot of what I do as a producer is work on songwriting with artists, and we sit down and we get the guitars out and we kind of chit chat about how we could make these songs better, and as opposed to just, hey, go away and try to write a better bridge and we'll talk tomorrow. We just try to work it out right there, and so we got working on this song, and then we reworked it, and it ended up probably is going to be the single on the record, so it's kind of cool. So what I'd like to do is play the demo, which is pretty funny.
Sweet.
And then after that, we'll listen to the song, and you guys can hear how it evolved and all that kind of stuff.
So this is the one that's named Dan and
Jeff and Ken in Drumheller.
In Drumheller. Yeah,
go for it.
Like trouble to me, the leaves are turning, and so have our thoughts. We're feeling colder, the temperature's dropped. Jeff and Ken in Drumheller, getting high in Drumheller. Jeff and Ken in Drumheller, getting high.
He just like, I think the chorus is cool, and I was like, I think it's cool too, and anyways, in the second line of the song, he said something about it's the trouble with you or something. Like, they were just sort of throwaway lyrics. And so we sort of started to work this song out called Trouble. And then we tracked the whole song there, and we tracked the band live off the floor, and the lyrics were still the placeholder lyrics, except he'd changed the chorus to Trouble. But all the verses were still about them and Drumheller. And so once he came over to Bowen Island, and we tracked vocals for a week, and we had our pads of pen and paper out, and we worked on the lyrics, and And I think we sorted it out, and now it has nothing to do with getting high in Drumheller. But it's a really cool song, and yeah, anyways, so we can have a listen.
Against the tide. I'm telling you now, what we got. If it's trouble we got, what I want. Then it's trouble I want.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, thank you. Yeah. It's not mastered yet, so I'll just throw that out there.
Can you talk a little bit more about how it evolved and
Yeah, I mean, with the band tried it a whole bunch of different ways. It started as a sort of country-ish, strummy thing, and we just got inspired by going a bit more 80s rock with it. Just kind of thought it would be fun. And Ken's sort of like this, you know, he's like a folk singer, but he really wanted to do something more rock-like. So he was listening to a lot of Ryan Adams and Bruce Springsteen and stuff like that, and John Mellencamp and that's kind of stuff. And I just said, well, maybe it's time for that kind of 80s rock to come back. So, and then the keyboard part really came together because great keyboard player named Mike Little came in and played keys on it, and just immediately was like, well, I've got to do this like dun, 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 dun. Yeah, and he actually did it on a DX7 synth as well, which ended up getting cut from the mix. I have a mix with it cranked up because I thought it sounded so 80s and awesome. But anyways, Ken finally was like, it's a little too much 80s. It's good with just the Wurlitzer. The guy was like, okay, we'll leave it as the Wurlitzer. But yeah, and then we just to go forward with that big, like more of an 80s product. You know, we did a big string section too, and just kind of like, let's go for it. And the rest of the record isn't really as rocky like that, but that one is. So, yeah.
And on the producer role, and was that a blurring line? Where did you and maybe you can expand that out? When at what point do you become a songwriter, and do you have a conversation with an artist and splits? And I mean, that's a big topic. But
I think that's different for every producer. I mean, I know in a lot of pop production now, the producer's always the writer now too, or part writer. And you know, those like all those pop songs will have 5 writers. I think it's different. It's changing. Because I came up as an artist and was an artist and toured for years, and then and I never went to audio school or anything either. And I just sort of was like, okay, my strength is going to be writing, so that'll be my thing. I'll write with artists, and then and then I, you know, producing records. I'd been in studio since I was 17 years old, so I kind of knew my way around a studio. But yeah. Oh, so to get to your question about those asking about splits, and I always just talk with the artists ahead of time. I'll say, hey, so I don't know. It's the type of artists I work with too, right? They often come in with songs that aren't quite done. Often there isn't a band. It's usually solo artists that we're going to put a band together for. So we'll say, well, I always say, well, how done are your songs? Like on a percentage. And you know, there are the artists, well, they're 100% done. Like I need no help at all. And I said, well, that's fine. Then that's when I will do you go home and write a new bridge and come back, and they'll see you in a week. But when most artists say, well, I think I'm 80% there. Like, I think I'm close, but there's something not quite right about the chorus yet or something. So I'll say, well, then we pull out the guitars and get writing, then let's do an 80-20 split. But I always say, whatever you're comfortable with, you just tell me, and we'll we'll just sort it out. And I've done a few different methods. You know, one bit of advice I got one time, and again, this is sort of unique to me. It's just because this is how I work with. But one advice was, well, why don't you just come up with a blanket split for the record, and then that way, it's decided ahead of time, and then the doors of creativity are open. So the artist, every time you make a bunch of writing suggestions, they don't think that you're fishing for a larger cut or something, right? So it's like, okay, we've agreed. The whole record's going to be 75-25. Now let's get the guitars out and make the best songs we can. So I've done that, and I think there's no rule really. I always just say to whoever I'm working with, what do you feel most comfortable with? Most people say, I don't know. I think, like with Ken, his band got pretty involved, and the bass player was, definitely like, no, I think the chord change should be different. So he'd restructure sort of how the chords would go, and then when we were cutting this song, Trouble, like when we did the backup vocals, he brought in his friend Justine to do backups, and she had lyrical changes. Wouldn't it be better if we said this? And so anyways, like, so that song ended like 5 people are cut in on the writing on that song, just because Ken was like, well, everyone's contributed. But at the end of the day, Ken is getting the majority, and I think that's what's most important. You know, he's still walking away with 70% or something, and everyone else is getting a little. So
it's important to have that conversation up front.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Otherwise, afterwards, you're going, well, I did add that word, and and or whatever. So I think people talk about this a lot because publishing and writing is sort of last place where there's money to be made. Yeah. But I think if you're so as a producer, if you are legitimately helping write that song, not just arrange it or structure it, but you're actually making melodic suggestions, lyrical suggestions, or sometimes chord changes, like where you're saying, I'm going to take your intro or your pre-chorus and let's make that a chorus. I don't know. I kind of feel like you're really contributing. And again, like I always say to them, you just tell me what you think makes sense. And usually artists say, well, I feel pretty good about throwing you 20%, or what, like I was barely there, like we should just split this half, and then I'll say, let's do that.
I agree with everything Winston is saying. The question of what is songwriting has been coming up a lot lately, because legally, I mean, when you copyright a song, it's melody and lyrics, but I think in today's music that doesn't make a lot of sense, when there's the productions that have so much going on sometimes, or even say an instrumental hook, or a vocal that's been chopped up into a hook. That's you're creating something there. So I think we are in a bit of a weird area where what's legally considered a song is a lot different than what really is. But I think being upfront with an artist beforehand, if artists are dead set on wanting to keep the song entirely to themselves, that's fine, and that's their decision. But knowing that from the get-go, I think is important for the writer and the producer.
I would say 90% of my clients are people that are very young and green in the industry. Okay. I mean, most of my work is artist development, right? Yeah. I find artists, we work together, we go find them their first record deal. You look at my client list, and that's most of them. So most of these artists are pretty new to the game, and so, I do say, like, I'm honest. I think these songs need work. So you have kind of 2 options. You can go away and rewrite them and come back, or we can pull out our instruments and I'm not a hack at writing, so let's see what we can come up with. Yeah. So I make that pretty clear, and I would.
But on the other hand,
if you came, Deb, I think the songs would be ready to go.
But on the other hand, producers used to make most of their money on getting points from sales, and there is no sales
totally
anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
everyone's looking for how to pay the bills,
and budgets are so much smaller. So
so it's kind of like, what do you do, right? If there's not a lot of money to be spent to make the record, again, most of my clients are making their first record or second record.
Yeah.
So writing, which again I say, if we do a split, it's imaginary money. Like, I'm not really making any money unless you have a hit.
That's true.
Or unless you get a ton of radio play or something. So it also makes me really invested in the project. I start calling everybody I know in the industry, like, you got to hear this artist. Partly because I'm like, well, I've got some writing on this record, but but it's true, right? You're sort of invested in the same way that a publishing company's invested in your project. So they're out there pushing it because they're going to make money from it. So so it's a win-win. Yeah. And if the album, if the song doesn't make anything, then my 20% is nothing anyways. So so that's kind of how I look at it. But I would never take it if I didn't legitimately help with the song. So do you want to say something on this topic?
Along the lines of what Ryan was saying, this is a kind of a new world, And I will say that pretty much every project I've ever done in my life, I've contributed to the writing per se, but never asked for a piece of it, meaning I spend weeks in pre-production, and it's kind of like, you know what, I think you should go to B there, and I think you should go to G, and then and I'll make suggestions, or I'll say, the weak spot here is the melody should move up, and why don't you try changing that? Those are all things that are really writing per se, but I consider it part of the producer's job. However, the way pop records and hip hop records are made now, they're very collaborative process. The guy that writes the drum beat, and that might be boom chick, boom boom chick, and is getting a piece of the writing. He is considered a writer. And so it's changing. Perhaps the economics have led that change. Perhaps the creative process have led that change. Certainly publishing is the first point you're going to get paid. You're going to see publishing before you'll see record royalties. So maybe that's all things have driven that. But I think it is a changing world in that respect. And I always consider it part of my job as a producer and never asked for it. There have been times when people have said, man, you really wrote that bridge. We'll give you a piece of it. But I don't look at it. But I do think, to your point, it's just part of the evolution of making.
Sort of answered that, but also wondering if this is a Canadian scenario or if it's different in the States, because I've heard largely or experienced a little bit that writing is, anyone who's collaborating, it's equal pie, 50-50 or a third, which is very beneficial to a producer, but also an emerging songwriter, because if you go in a writing session and even just you have a line, suddenly you're getting a third of something that maybe two hit songwriters wrote. So that's what I've heard across the board, and this sounds
I think
different.
like in Nashville, so we're getting into genre stuff, pop versus Nashville. The old saying is, change a word, get a third. And and I like, but people it's a much more collaborative process, and I think that writers who are writing for country or writing more for pop are thinking, we're going to have more success if there is 5 of us in on this and everyone is contributing, and so it's genre specific to a certain extent too, because in more of a singer-songwriter genre, you might not give the guy who writes the drum part a cut, right? But you might give the producer who helped with some lyric changes a cut. And I don't know, it's so gray. Like, I think it's gray, and I think you always just have to say to the artist, what are you most comfortable with? What makes you feel good about this collaborative process and splitting any future millions? And if they're like, I feel good giving you $200,000 of every million or something, then it's like, okay, let's do it. So I don't know. Yeah, I think it's like gray, but I do think what both Ryan and George are saying is that, it's kind of where it's going, and I think it's that sharing, the producers and the beat makers and whoever's in the room, everyone's getting a little bit. So
I wonder if it also gives an opportunity, because everyone's working style is so different. There is so much, emphasis for some producers on development and songwriting and that side of things, and like that's kind of my approach as a producer. Whereas in other cases, it might be, you're coming in pretty dang ready to go, and it's the magic of the studio, but really the core structure of the thing is made. So I wonder if it's an opportunity for each. If you're thinking of yourself as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, it's a way for you to attract your clientele, the kind of clientele who wants to work that way, right? So you can create an audience around your working style that's like,
because every writer is going to be, or we're talking about being a producer, right? So every producer has different things to offer, and that's what I realize. I might have, my skill set might be to help you make your song better, as opposed to getting the most kick-ass drum sound or something. That, like, me offering that song structure skill set or whatever, that's my card. And so I think every producer has to find what their card is
And
certainly, yeah.
And maybe the changing environment actually gives us all a business opportunity to decide how we want to work.
Sure.
Because there isn't a cookie cutter. We are responsible for making an audience for our craft.
Yeah, totally.
Cool.
Yeah, totally.
Hey, Winston.
Hi, David.
How's it going?
Good.
My question is kind of more related to band stuff. So let's say you feel like the song's great and Ken feels like the song's great and Jeff comes in and says, what happened to Drumheller, man? I really missed that. Or just like, but this is kind of a question like for all the panelists, if they don't mind, but like, what, do you have any tips for how to kind of reconcile that situation where there's different voices and...
So let's talk about that project in particular. Like that project is Ken Stead. He's the boss, and that's his project. So he brings his band in. They're his band. We didn't hire session guys. Those are actually his boys, kind of thing. And they get that Ken's boss. So I think that they're probably pretty stoked that Ken threw them all 5% each in the writing department because they made suggestions, and Jeff was high in Drumheller as well, and. You know, I think so. Everyone he was part of it, and probably threw in a few words to the original demo. Like I think they wrote it, in the car. Or, I don't know. So, anyways, I think that at the end of the day, whoever sort of the leader is in charge, and that's again why I'm always saying to the artist, whatever you think, like you tell me what you're comfortable with, and that makes me feel good, and then let's get to work. So does that kind of answer?
So it's kind of establishing who the real boss is.
I think so, but it's going to be different every U2, from what I understand, or like those big iconic bands. I think REM was the same. Everything was split 4 ways. They just decided that, much like Lennon McCartney. Like that's what our deal's going to be. Whoever writes what, and then so they just did that, and then nobody was richer than someone else, and you know what I mean. It makes for a
most bands do that. Most professional bands do that now, where everybody in the band gets a piece of the writing. Oh, sorry. Yeah, most bands are doing that now, where, like you mentioned, U2, that everybody in the band is sharing equally, and that way there's never any tension in the band. Well, there's always tension, but.
But it does, you know what I mean? It makes for, everyone understands, and it's no one's battling because they want a bigger. And so I think, we go back to Lennon McCartney and their 50-50 idea. Here's John, here's my song. And he would just be like, oh yeah, change that. And he wouldn't push because he's thinking, oh, Paul won't give me 50-50 if I don't. He would just say, no, it's great already. I'm not going to mess with that, but I would fix that, And so I've said to people, like when I was back talking earlier about that flat 80-20 split that I've done on records before, I would bring that up. I'd say, this is our Lennon-McCartney split. Like we've just decided that we're partners for this record, and that's our partnership in the writing department. Now let's get our guitars out and write. And you're not concerned about who wrote how much. So you've already got your Lennon-McCartney a deal sort of again, that sometimes works, and sometimes for some artists is like, I don't like that, let's do it song by song. And then I'm like, that's cool too, whatever you feel better about. So
do you your role in sort of managing relationships between band members, and there's a great story with Feist and taking a chance, and
I mean, I think as a producer, you are a counselor as well from the beginning, because that's you are. If I'm working just with a solo artist, often we're working on a song or writing a song, then there's tears because it's about a breakup, and then we have to sit for an hour and talk about that breakup and how it affected them, or the band gets in a fight, and you got to sit down, everybody, and then. The end, it's like, hey, let's all do a fresh start and high five, and you're the counselor, the mediator, and the listener, and all the. So there's a huge role being a producer, more than just pressing record. I think, Elisa.
Yeah, well, and going back to your question, sort of as well, I think what you're talking about is very true, and a large part of being a producer is making sure that everyone's heard. And as long as everyone feels like they can get their ideas out, I'm afraid, then, some of it becomes less of an issue also. Like, it really sets the grounds for creativity. And sometimes it means a rabbit hole and a tangent, and it can be frustrating, but other times it means you get to a place that you never would have imagined if it was really just like, okay, you know, I'm the boss and my decisions go, and yeah. And
working with the artists, and when you're working with classical artists, it's a bit different. I work mostly with classical artists, even though I ran indie residencies and things, and many students. But I particularly remember being in a studio once, running a session, and you have to be on time and on that talk back. And if the musician, you know, something goes wrong and they want to tell you, okay, I'm starting here, I'm going again. You know, they don't want to be waiting for you. And I had my engineer, who was one of my students, and it just happened, this could have been anyone, but it was a woman, and she had gone through a breakup. And I noticed that day quite quiet, you know, and then we're in the middle of a session, and she kind of just broke down for a bit. So I'm trying to run the session, make sure everything is fine in the studio, and deal with this while I'm, you know, dealing with the normal dealings of being a producer with the musicians counting on you for everything, and having to be on top of it, being the second pair of ears, completely prepared, because there can be 100 things go wrong with the musician, but if you're the producer and you have to stop for any reason, then it can throw the session off. So there's all of that to deal with. But I just thought that was funny. That was had someone going through a breakup who was working with me in the studio when I'm trying to deal with, you know, probably a husband and wife team, keeping them on track, you know, doing some duet. So I was.
So Winston, I was kind of talking to you about this in the car, but I have a question kind of for everyone around this topic, is more on the subject of really young, inexperienced artists. I don't want to quash the enthusiasm. I don't want to be a cynic. I don't want to just overwhelm them with a list of the practical realities of what it really is going to be like. I was literally speechless. Like, I just didn't even know what to say. The other piece that came, and this is maybe just specific to her situation, is she played me some of her songs. And there was definitely some raw talent there, but there was also a lot of work to be done.
Working with a producer it's all developing trust. It's like, well, why are you here? Like, why are you here sharing your songs with me, and not just at home recording them on your laptop? And it's like, oh, because maybe I have some expertise to offer, or something that can help you. So I think that the reason they're there and they're paying you is because they want your feedback. So I guess what I'm saying is I wouldn't hold back. I would say, here's what I think. You can take it or leave it. I think this, and I've, you know, I'll pick you read artists and you could tell who you could be more blunt with and stuff, but some I'm like, this chorus blows. Like, it's not good and we have to rewrite it. We got to do it, and we should do it right now. You know, and then so then you throw out ideas, and so you'll get a sense of where this artist is really closed and they don't want you to touch their song, or an artist is really open and they're like you were saying earlier, so, oh my God, that's a great idea. That is such a good, okay. And so, and I think that the people that are more open are going to have a better career. They're probably going to go further, and because they have to be open and willing to co-write and collaborate and all that stuff. And so then, if they are really closed, then we'll actually spend the afternoon having that talk about how if they could just be a bit more open, the opportunities are really going to open up for you. And so again, then now we're getting into being you know, a psychologist and stuff, but you just kind of work, you're trying to help these, again, and we're talking about working with young artists, right? So we're really helping them understand that to have a career and to even just get their career started and launched, they have to approach it with a really open mind, still be firm about your beliefs and your artistry, but at the same time go, yeah, I'm working with you because I trust you, and you know, and so I'm gonna go with this idea. And then I'll say, go with it, and then we'll do it. And if later you look back and go, oh, I didn't like it, Winston, like that was not a good idea, then I'll say, fine, then, but I'm glad we tried it. So I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Quick question? Well, given what you've all said about all the different aspects of things that you do,
Do you go normally by, and the collaborative aspect, the split, do you normally like to work by the song or by the hour? Because if you're breaking down and having breakdowns and stuff like that, that takes up a lot of time, right?
Do you mean charging as a producer? Like, what's my...
Well, generally speaking, if somebody comes to produce a song with you or to produce an album, let's say, would you be more apt to say, okay, well, if we're going to go by the song, then I'd be more apt to do it this way. If we're going to go by the hour, then, you know what I mean? That kind of thing.
I know, yeah.
How does that conversation work?
I don't, I think everybody, I mean, you get very different responses from people on this panel. I think for me, I always ask how much money do you have to work with? And then I try to give them an idea of what I think we can do for that amount of money. Because it's one thing when I'm working on like the Ken's record, I mean, he was funded by Alberta Music and had, he'd won a radio contest and had lots of money to work with. So we were able to really, hire string sections and have a great time. And then someone else says, "Oh, I just want to do a song, and I have $1,000 or something." And I'll say, "Okay, well, this is what I think we can do. Come over to my studio in Bowen. We're gonna work on it. We're gonna write. We're gonna make the best song we can." So I think it's going to be different for sure. But anyways, I would never go by the hour because I don't want anyone ever thinking that I'm doing this. I would rather we agree on it, and then when as a producer you're always kind of only as good as your last thing, and so I'll end up working on it for days because I just want it to be good. And it's like, well, they didn't have any money, but I'm still like, it's got to be good, so I'll work. Exactly. So you're doing your best to make sure that it's as. I mean, in the end, they're getting a great deal because you're going to do your best no matter what they pay.